Celeste Lee died in her early 50s. She had spent her life very conscious of her own mortality because in her teen years, she developed an autoimmune disease that led to her kidneys failing. So she had no choice but to go on dialysis. Dialysis worked for many years. Then she was lucky, she got a kidney transplant. That worked for a while, and then it failed, and then she went back on dialysis. When she died at University of North Carolina, the doctor said she was in America, she was the longest person ever who had been on dialysis. But don't feel sorry for Celeste. She led a full life. She graduated from college. She was living at home in Boston at the age of 28 when she decided, I got to get a life. And she did what a single woman does living with her mother at 28. She got on Match.com. And lo and behold, she met Daniel Lee, a Korean professor at University of Chicago who was divorced with a child, and they communicated on the internet, decided they were maybe following love, and met for one weekend halfway between Boston and Chicago, and voila, they got married. And she picked up her life and moved to Chicago to be with Daniel. Celeste had faced the fact that she was not going to live long, and so she was very clear about what she wanted at the end of life. She was very clear that she wanted to die at home. She was very clear that she wanted Daniel to remarry, and he did. And she was very clear about what was important to her. She said to me, you know, almost everybody has some type of bucket list, things they want to accomplish. Taking their children to Disney World, the graduation of a grandson, going on a trip to Sweden. And she said, my bucket list isn't like any of those things. My bucket list is that I wanted to have intimate conversations. And this last year of my life has been the best year of my life because I've had more intimate conversations about death and dying than I've ever had. And she said, not all my friends can go there with me. Not all my family can. But every person who's had that conversation with me, it's been like a gift of love. And so my question for you today is, are you having intimate, authentic conversations with those that you love about what's important to you at end of life? That's what we're going to be talking about today. Having the conversation. So when I mention end of life, what comes to mind for a lot of people is Maury Schwartz. Now you might remember him. Tuesdays with Maury. Maury was a professor of sociology at Brandeis University, and he had thousands of students over the years, but one of his students was Mitch Albom, who happened to be at the time, 20 years later, they had lost contact, but Mitch happened to be a sports writer in Detroit, and one night, Mitch turns on the news, and there's Maury Schwartz, his old professor, who he was very fond of, being interviewed on Nightline because Maury had ALS. Some of you think of that as Lou Gehrig's disease, and was living with ALS. And Mitch immediately contacted Maury, flew across the country, and happened to get there for a visit on a Tuesday. Their visit, after having not seen each other for 20 years, was so profound that Mitch said to Maury, I'm going to come see you every Tuesday. And Maury said, that's right, we'll do Tuesdays. That'll be our day. And Mitch was committed to do that until the end of Maury Schwartz's life. And this book has been translated into numerous languages. 17 million copies have been written. It was on the New York Times bestseller list for 4 years. And part of the reason is because Maury was full of wisdom with his impish grin and loving to dance. And the quote that I love most from the wisdom he shared as he was facing the end of his life was, as you grow, you learn more. Aging is not just decay, it's growth. It's more than the negative that you're going to die. It's also the positive that you understand that you're going to die and that you live a better life because of it. And so, how do we face death? Well, it's shaped by the culture we grew up in. It's shaped by the religion you grew up in, the nationality you grew up in, your ethnicity, whether you're Italian or Greek or, Yugoslavian. We saw parents and we saw grandparents and aunts and uncles either talk about death or not talk about death. We saw the way they behaved at funerals, and we mimicked their behavior as we grew up and went to funerals when we were in teenagers and then into young adulthood. There's a culture in our families that drives how we feel about this. And when someone says to me, I've never felt comfortable talking about death, I always say, did your family talk about it? And in most instances, the answer is no, they did not. And yet, death is a reality for all of us. And so the question is, how do we face that? Many of you remember this is a board game Life. Do you remember the board game Life? Some of you may be too young. But there was a game we played where you went through early childhood, you went through your teen years, you went through your young adult years, your middle age, your empty nest phase. And in all of those phases that we went through as we played the game of life, or as we had composed our own lives, we developed plans. And those plans shaped the decisions we made about where to live and where to work and whether to have children and whether to get married. And yet, for some reason, although we've had a planning mentality through most of our lives, we fail to do that and to address the inevitable at end of life. James was a successful tax accountant who had pancreatic cancer for 14 years. 14 years. And when he died, his family couldn't find the will and didn't know what to write in the obituary. Sue and her siblings had been very close growing up, but they didn't agree with the way either of their parents were treated at end of life. And they especially didn't agree on the disposition of the family cottage. And 20 years later, they don't speak to each other. Julie was 83 years old, in poor health for the last 3 years of her life. Very poor health the last 3 or 4 months of her life. And her family, her husband and children, could not decide on her treatment plans at end of life. And when she was advised by doctors at Hilton Head Hospital to go on hospice care, the family couldn't agree, didn't really think she needed hospice care, and she died 3 days later. Larry was a Marine, 65 years old, washboard abs, and he died suddenly at 65 of a heart attack. But in the Marines, they advise you that you might be deployed into a war zone at any time, and so they advise you to have a document that tells your loved ones what's important to you, how you want your assets distributed, whether you want to be cremated. And so Larry had that book in his 20s, and when he met Maggie and fell in love with her, he had that book, and he committed to her that he would update it every year as her Christmas present. And it included who the plumber was, what his passcodes were, what the financial investment balances were. It included everything she needed to know. And Maggie said 2 months after his shockingly sudden death, I feel so sorry for other widows who are unprepared. I realize that for 40 years, Larry gave me the gift of knowing what to do in the event of his death. And I was so well prepared for this. And I feel so sorry for people who don't have that gift. So what do we do to prepare for end of life? Well, the first thing we do is we live life fully to the end of life. And this is the book you need to read to think about that, Driving Miss Norma. I love Driving Miss Norma. It's a memoir. It's a true story of Tim and Ramey. And Tim and Ramey are a couple who retired in their 50s and were nomads, living out of a very small RV, traveling around the country, going where the sun was. And every year they went to Michigan to visit Tim's mom and dad. Miss Norma was his mother. And one year they get to Michigan, and lo and behold, Tim's father is really failing. It's clear he's dying. And so they talk to Miss Norma, and they say, Miss Norma, you're 90. You can't stay in this house by yourself. And so, we will help you move into a continuing care community here, senior, or we'll help you move near Ramey's mom in Pennsylvania, or you could go on the road with us. So 3 days after her husband's death, when they go to the oncologist to hear the treatment plan for Miss Norma's new diagnosis of ovarian cancer, the doctor describes all the treatment options to her and explains everything, and then says to Miss Norma, all 4'10" of her, Miss Norma, what do you think? And she pulls herself up and she says, hell, I'm 90, I'm hitting the road. And so they bought a bigger RV, and they took Miss Norma wherever she wanted to go. They actually brought her to Hilton Head. And she was in the St. Patrick's Day parade. Some of you may remember that. It's a great book about living life fully to the end and has strong messages about it, about go for it. But the whole time that Miss Norma was living life fully with Tim and Ramey, they were also planning for the end of Miss Norma's life, because it was clear that she had cancer and that she was going to die at some point. But she had adventures, lots of adventures. This book has been translated into I don't know how many languages. A screenplay's been written for a movie. It's been purchased as a movie, and the screenplay's been written, and I'm waiting to see it produced as a great Hollywood movie. So their message not only was go for the gusto, but also that you have to plan for the inevitable. You have to face the inevitable and plan. And what does that mean? Well, it means that you think about whether your home is going to work from a perspective of, mobility issues. You think about going and actually visiting skilled nursing facilities. Bob and Betsy recently faced the fact that he was placed in a skilled nursing facility because of the discharge planner who happened to be at the hospital that day, because Betsy had no plan for where he would go in the case he needed that care. Totally unprepared. So you visit skilled nursing facilities. In fact, EMSs have taught me that what you do is you have a to-go bag by your door, and it has your medications in it, it has your advance directives, it has your power of attorney, it has everything you need, all your medications, it has it all in a plastic bag, so that when your husband does fall, you can grab that bag on the way out the door and be totally prepared at the hospital to answer any questions. So you just do simple things like that that prepare you for a worst case scenario. The question is not what is the matter with you, but what matters to you. What matters to you? And we have a total disconnect on this topic. The study done by the Conversation Project found that 90% of people believe that it's important for you to discuss your end-of-life wishes with those you love. 90%, 27% have done so. A California Health Foundation study found that 82% of people felt it was important for you to document your wishes in writing. 23% have done so. And 80% of people reported in another study that they thought it was important to talk to their physician if they had a serious illness about what their end-of-life wishes are, and yet only 7% of those seriously ill do initiate that kind of conversation. So we have a disconnect between what we know should happen and what we actually do. The medical field has medicalized the dying process by saying that you have to have advanced directives. Do you want a ventilator? Do you want to be put on a feeding tube? Those kinds of things. And somebody who'll serve as your medical proxy, who'll speak for you and make health decisions if you cannot. The legal profession has legalized this process by saying that you have to have a will that describes your distribution of assets. You need to have a power of attorney. The funeral home industry has made it all about your obituary and your celebration of life or your funeral services. And in fact, none of those things are adequate, because what really matters to you at end of life, dying is a social process. And what matters to you is that who's going to take care of Buster, your cat? That you really want to reconcile with your brother. That you want to know who's going to care for your flowers in your garden. So the good news is there are resources for you. And the first resource I'm going to share with you is the Conversation Project. And the Conversation Project produces booklets like the one you see on the left. They call them toolkits, but they have them for all different circumstances. People with dementia, how to talk to about death and dying with children. And those booklets walk you through how to start the conversation, because the most common discussion I have with someone who says, well, I don't know how to get started. So that's what these books do for you. And they start with reflection. You really figuring out in your soul what's important to you. And at this stage, a lot of people are asking a lot of spiritual questions. Questions about, what is there an afterlife, and what do I believe, and what is my relationship with my God? But it's also reflection about how aggressive do I want medical treatment to be? So it's deep reflection, followed by clarifying for yourself where, when, and who. Do you want to have the conversation in person? Do you want to have it in your living room? Do you want to have it at your kitchen table? Who do you want to have it with? Do you want to have it with your spouse first and then your children later? And when is the best time? Well, all the kids are going to be here for Thanksgiving. Let's have one discussion while they're here at Thanksgiving so everyone hears the same message. And then the next thing is you actually have the conversation. And it's not a conversation, it's a series of conversations. There's an icebreaker. But it's where you share with them what matters to you based on the questions you filled out in the book. And then the next thing after that is you actually reflect again on, how did that conversation go? And who else do I want to have it with? A friend recently said, it wasn't difficult for me to have this conversation with my family members, but it's been very difficult with my friends. You have to realize that this is hard for people, because they can't imagine living without you. But those people love you and want to honor your wishes and cannot do it if they don't know what your wishes are. Another resource that's terrific is 5 Wishes. Now, 5 Wishes is actually a legal document. It's legal in the state of South Carolina. It's legal in all states but 8 recognize this as a legal document. And 5 Wishes goes through a set of 5 questions. The first 2 are around who you want to be, your medical proxy, and advanced directives. And then the last 3 are about spirituality, comfort care, and I forget the third one. But they're important. They're all important. And that document, when completed, serves as actually an official will and testament in the state of South Carolina. And I'm here to tell you, all of these documents can be downloaded for free, printed right from the website for free. So there should be no financial disincentive for you to being ready for this. And so I'm encouraging you that, like Celeste, and like Tim and Ramey, and like Miss Norma, and like Maury Schwartz, that you spend some time thinking about what's important to you and share that with those who you love, so that they can honor your wishes. That's what they want to do. They want you to die in peace and with respect and dignity. And you telling them what is important to you is a way to do that. Thank you.